The moment Claire Bennett decided to help the wounded stranger, she unknowingly stepped into the world of the most feared man in New York. Claire froze as a sharp popping sound echoed through the subway entrance across the street from St. Anne's Medical Center. It was 1:13 a.m., and the city was wrapped in the kind of cold summer rain that turned the sidewalks silver under the streetlights. She had just finished a double shift in the emergency department, her pale blue scrubs hidden beneath a thrift store trench coat, her shoulder-length wavy hair damp from the mist. Exhaustion pressed against her like a weight, but instinct made her look up. People near the station were already moving away, heads down, footsteps quick and nervous. Claire should have kept walking. She knew that. Her apartment was only 4 blocks away, and after 14 hours on her feet, all she wanted was a hot shower and a few hours of sleep. Then she saw him. A tall man stumbled out from the shadows beside the station entrance, one hand braced against the brick wall. Even from half a block away, she could tell he was badly hurt. His dark shirt was soaked from the rain, and his movements were growing weaker with every step. He looked over his shoulder once, as if checking whether someone was following him, and then his knees gave out. He collapsed near the curb, partially hidden by a parked delivery van. Claire's heart began to hammer. Every warning she had ever heard rushed through her mind: don't get involved. Call 911. Wait for the police. But when she took a step backward, the man lifted his head. Their eyes met across the rain-streaked street. His were dark, alert, and filled with something that stopped her cold, not fear for himself, but urgency. He reached out as if trying to hold on to consciousness. Claire crossed the street before she could change her mind. Water splashed around her sneakers as she knelt beside him. Up close, he was even more striking: broad shoulders, powerful build, skin the color of polished walnut, and the faint edge of a tattoo disappearing beneath the collar of his shirt. He looked to be in his mid-30s, the kind of man whose presence would dominate any room even when he was barely conscious. "Hey, stay with me," she whispered, slipping into the calm tone she used with frightened patience. "An ambulance is on the way." His hand shot out and caught her wrist with surprising strength. "No ambulance," he said, his voice rough and low. "Don't let them know I'm alive." Claire stared at him, rain dripping from the ends of her hair onto his sleeve. "You need medical attention. Please." The word was quiet, almost unfamiliar on his tongue. She hesitated. Sirens were beginning to sound somewhere in the distance, still several blocks away. The man's grip loosened, and his head fell back against the van. Claire looked toward the subway entrance, expecting to see someone coming after him, but the street was suddenly empty. Only the rain moved. "What's your name?" she asked. His eyes opened halfway. For a moment, he seemed to debate whether to answer. "Darius," he said finally. "Darius what?" He gave the faintest shake of his head. "No last name. No explanation. Just a stranger bleeding onto a wet Manhattan sidewalk while the city pretended not to notice." Claire swallowed hard. Every rational thought told her to walk away and let the authorities handle it. But another memory rose up instead: her father lying alone after a hit-and-run when she was 16, ignored by passing cars until it was too late. She had promised herself that if she ever had the chance to help someone, she would not look away. Darius's eyes were closing again. His breathing had become uneven, and the hand that had gripped her wrist was slipping. Claire made her decision. "Okay," she said softly. "I'm not leaving you here." As she slid an arm around his shoulders and helped him toward her old Honda parked down the block, she had no idea that the man leaning heavily against her was the same name whispered in police briefings, splashed across confidential files, and feared by men who carried guns for a living. To Claire, he was only a wounded stranger trying desperately to survive the night. And that was exactly why she chose to save him. Claire had never driven with a stranger slumped beside her before, and she had certainly never driven through Manhattan at 1:30 in the morning praying that every red light would stay green. The windshield wipers pushed sheets of rain aside in a frantic rhythm while Darius leaned against the passenger door, one hand pressed to his side, his breathing shallow but controlled. He had not made a sound since she helped him into the car. That frightened her more than panic would have. Most injured people talked too much when they were scared. This man was conserving energy, measuring every breath as if he had spent a lifetime surviving situations where weakness could get him killed. Claire kept both hands tight on the steering wheel. "I am taking you to my apartment," she said, glancing at him for half a second. "It is not much, but I have a medical kit there." Darius's eyes remained closed. "You should not do this. You already told me that." "I mean it." His voice was barely above a whisper. "If anyone sees me with you, it becomes your problem too." The word sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the rain. Claire looked in the rearview mirror. No headlights seemed to be following them, but she still took 2 unnecessary turns before pulling into the narrow alley behind her building in Queens. The apartment complex was old brick with flickering security lights and a front entrance that stuck whenever the weather got damp. She parked near the back stairs where the cameras had been broken for months. "Can you manage a few steps? We can rest on each landing if we need to," she asked. They stopped twice on the stairs, Darius gripping the railing while Claire kept him steady. Darius opened his eyes and nodded once. When he tried to stand, his legs nearly gave out. Claire caught his arm, surprised by the solid weight of him. Even injured, he felt incredibly strong, his muscles tense beneath the soaked fabric of his shirt. Together they climbed the stairs slowly, one step at a time, the sound of rain echoing through the stairwell. Claire's apartment was a 4th-floor studio barely big enough for a bed, a kitchenette, and a second-hand couch. The air smelled faintly of coffee and lavender detergent. She locked the door behind them and guided him to the couch. Darius sat carefully, scanning the room with sharp, assessing eyes despite his condition. He noticed everything: the single window facing the alley, the fire escape outside, the baseball bat propped beside the refrigerator, the framed photo of Claire and an older man at Coney Island. "You live alone?" he asked. "Yes." "No roommate? No boyfriend coming home?" Claire pulled a clean towel from the bathroom. "Just me." He studied her for a moment longer, as if deciding whether to believe her. Then he gave a small nod and let his head rest back against the couch. Up close, she could see how pale he had become beneath his dark skin. Water dripped from the ends of his short hair onto the leather cushion. Claire knelt in front of him and opened her emergency kit. "I need to take a look at the injury." Darius's jaw tightened. For the first time, real hesitation crossed his face. "I am not going to hurt you," she said gently. A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth. "That is usually my line." Despite herself, Claire almost laughed. The tension eased just enough for him to let her help him remove the soaked jacket and the torn outer shirt. Beneath it, she found a compression bandage already wrapped around his side, darkened by rain and blood. Whoever had put it there knew what they were doing. As she carefully checked the dressing, her eyes caught the tattoo stretching across his shoulder and upper chest, a black crown surrounded by Roman numerals and a lion's head rendered in intricate detail. It was not the kind of tattoo someone got on a whim. It looked like a symbol of rank, legacy, and power. Claire's hands paused for a fraction of a second. Darius noticed. "Problem?" he asked quietly. "No," she said, forcing herself to focus. "The bandage needs to be changed. You lost a lot of blood, but I think the bleeding has slowed." She reached for fresh gauze and disinfectant, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling growing in her stomach. Then his phone vibrated inside the jacket she had set on the chair. The screen lit up with a single name in bold white letters, Luca. A second later, another message appeared. "Boss, where are you?" The room suddenly felt much smaller. Claire looked from the phone to the man sitting on her couch, rainwater still dripping onto her floor, and realized she knew absolutely nothing about the stranger she had just brought into her home. Claire stared at the glowing phone screen while the rain tapped softly against the window above the fire escape. Luca. The name remained there for 3 seconds before another message appeared beneath it. We are searching every hospital in Queens. Reply now. A third message followed almost immediately. If you are conscious, send a location. Darius noticed her expression and held out his hand. Give me the phone. Claire hesitated, then passed it over. His fingers moved quickly despite the tremor she could now see in his hand. He typed a short response, deleted it, typed another, and finally locked the screen without sending anything. You are not answering them, she asked. Not yet. He set the phone face down on the coffee table. The movement was calm, deliberate, as if he were postponing a business meeting rather than ignoring men who sounded increasingly desperate. Claire opened a packet of sterile gauze and tried to keep her voice steady. Who is Luca? Someone who works for me. Doing what? Darius looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. You ask a lot of questions for someone who brought a stranger into her apartment. I am a nurse. Questions are part of the job. You are not a nurse yet. Claire blinked. How do you know that? Your study guides are on the kitchen counter. Advanced pharmacology, trauma assessment, and licensing exam prep. You are in your final year. She glanced toward the stack of textbooks she had left beside the microwave and felt strangely exposed. You noticed all that in 30 seconds? I notice everything. The answer was not boastful. It sounded like a fact he had learned through hard experience. Claire returned to changing the bandage, but her uneasiness kept growing. The tattoo on his shoulder nagged at her memory. She had seen symbols like that somewhere before, on the news, maybe, or in one of the crime documentaries her father used to watch. A black crown. Roman numerals. A lion. She reached for the antiseptic, and Darius caught her wrist gently. That is going to sting. I know. You warned me before the subway. Most people do not bother. Claire met his eyes. Most people are not trying to help someone they found bleeding in the rain. For a moment neither of them spoke. The apartment felt impossibly quiet, the kind of silence that settles after midnight when the city finally seems to exhale. Then the television turned on by itself. Claire had left the remote wedged between the couch cushions, and Darius must have pressed it accidentally while shifting his weight. The screen flashed to a local news channel. Breaking news glowed across the bottom in red. Claire reached for the remote, but the anchor's next words made her freeze. Authorities are responding to reports of an attempted assassination involving alleged organized crime figure Darius Romano. Sources say the incident occurred near a Manhattan subway station shortly after 1 o'clock this morning. Romano, who has not been seen since the attack, is considered missing. Police have not confirmed his condition. Claire's hand went numb. The screen filled with a file photo of a man in a charcoal suit stepping out of a black SUV. He was standing beside several city officials, expression unreadable, broad shoulders filling the frame. The same dark eyes. The same face that was now sitting less than 3 feet away from her couch. The remote slipped from her fingers onto the rug. Darius did not look at the television. He looked only at her. Claire, he said quietly, turn it off. She could barely breathe. Every headline she had ever half ignored came rushing back. Romano linked to racketeering investigation. Witnesses refused to testify. Businesses pay for protection. The name was whispered with fear in every borough. The most feared Mafia boss in New York. And he was in her apartment, wearing one of her old gray sweatshirts because his own clothes had been soaked with rain. Claire grabbed the remote and switched off the television. The screen went black, but the silence that followed was even louder. Darius leaned back against the couch, exhaustion finally breaking through his carefully controlled expression. Now you know why I told you to leave me there, he said. Claire stared at him, her pulse thundering in her ears. She should have been terrified. She should have ordered him out, called the police, and locked the door behind him. Instead, the first thing she heard herself ask was, "Are the people who did this still looking for you?" Darius's eyes narrowed slightly, as if that was not the question he expected. "Yes," he answered. "They are." Claire stood motionless beside the coffee table, the dark television screen reflecting her pale face and the outline of the man she had unknowingly brought home. Rain continued to whisper against the window, but now every sound seemed amplified, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking wall clock, the faint footsteps from another apartment down the hall. Darius watched her carefully, as if weighing whether she was about to run for the door. "You should be afraid," he said quietly. Claire folded her arms, more to steady herself than for protection. "I do not even know what that means anymore." He leaned back against the couch, the gray sweatshirt pulling slightly across his broad shoulders. Without the soaked clothes and the emergency on the street, he looked less like a wounded stranger and more like the man from the news, controlled, dangerous, impossible to ignore. The tattoos that disappeared beneath the collar only added to the impression that he belonged to a world built on rules she had never been taught. "The news makes you sound like a monster," she admitted. "Sometimes the news is useful that way." "That is not an answer." "No," he said, holding her gaze, "it is not." Claire opened her mouth to ask another question when a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. 3 quick knocks. Then silence. Both of them froze. Darius was on his feet instantly despite the injury, all traces of exhaustion gone. The transformation was startling. 1 second he had been a patient on her couch, the next he was a man whose instincts had taken over completely. He moved toward the side of the window without looking directly through it. "Did you tell anyone you were bringing me here?" "No." Another knock came, louder this time. Claire's pulse began to race. "Maybe it is my neighbor." Darius shook his head once. "Your neighbor would call your name." A male voice came through the door. "Claire. It is building maintenance. We need to check for a leak." Claire frowned. "Maintenance does not come at 2 in the morning." Darius's eyes narrowed. "And they would not know your first name unless they had asked someone downstairs." The voice spoke again, smoother now. "Miss Bennett, please open the door. It will only take a minute." Hearing her last name made the blood drain from her face. Darius crossed the room silently and stopped beside the kitchen entrance, positioning himself where he could see the door without being seen through the peephole. "Do not open it," he said. Claire nodded, her throat suddenly dry. She stepped closer to the door and tried to keep her voice steady. "I did not report a leak. You must have the wrong apartment." Silence answered her. Then came the faint sound of footsteps shifting outside, followed by a low murmur she could not make out. More than one person. Claire looked toward Darius. He was listening with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. "They are checking the hallway," he whispered. "How could they find you already?" "Because whoever set this up knew I might survive." His expression darkened, not with fear but with realization. This was not random. Claire's mind raced. She had spent years believing that if she worked hard, kept her head down, and avoided trouble, life would remain predictable. Now armed men might be standing outside her apartment because she had stopped to help someone in the rain. The footsteps moved farther down the hall. A door opened somewhere near the stairwell, followed by a brief exchange of voices. Then everything went quiet. Too quiet. Claire realized she had been holding her breath. "Maybe they left," she whispered. Darius did not answer immediately. He glanced toward the fire escape outside the window, then back to the door. "Maybe," he said, though his tone suggested he did not believe it. His phone vibrated again on the coffee table, buzzing against the wood. This time the screen lit up with a new message from Luca: "We have reason to believe there is a leak inside our organization. Trust no one." Darius read it, and for the first time since she had met him, Claire saw genuine concern break through the armor of the most feared man in New York. He looked up at her, the weight of the message settling between them. "Claire," he said quietly, "the people outside may not be the only danger. Someone close to me wanted me dead, and until I know who it is, anyone who helps me becomes a target." Every movement clearly cost him effort, but adrenaline was still carrying him through the pain. The hallway outside Claire's apartment remained silent for almost 2 full minutes, but neither of them relaxed. Darius stood near the kitchen entrance, his head tilted slightly as he listened for any change in the building. Claire stayed by the door, one hand pressed against the cool wood, feeling the faint vibration of footsteps somewhere below on the stairs. "They are not trying to force the door," she whispered. "Not yet," Darius replied. His voice was calm, but the tension in his posture told a different story. Claire looked at him and finally asked the question that had been building since the news report. "Why would someone inside your organization betray you?" Darius was quiet for a moment. The dim light from the kitchen caught the sharp angles of his face, making him look older than 35. "Because power makes people impatient," he said. "And because I trusted someone I should have watched more carefully." "Who?" "I do not know for certain." He picked up his phone again, reading Luca's warning a second time. "But the list is very short." Claire crossed her arms. "You are talking about this like it is a business dispute." A faint smile touched his mouth. "In my world, the two are often the same thing." She should have been horrified by that answer. Instead, she found herself studying him the way she would study a difficult patient, looking for the person beneath the surface. "You do not seem surprised," she said. "I have spent 15 years expecting betrayal. What surprises me is that it happened tonight." "Tonight was important." Darius looked toward the rain-streaked window. "I was supposed to meet someone who had evidence. Financial records, communications, names. Enough to expose the people who have been using my organization for things I never authorized." Claire frowned. "You are saying there are crimes happening that even you did not approve?" "I am saying," he answered carefully, "that there is a difference between controlling a business and controlling every person inside it." Before Claire could respond, a new sound drifted up from the street below, the low rumble of an engine. Darius moved to the edge of the window and looked down through a narrow gap in the curtain. His expression changed instantly. "Black SUV," he said. "Parked across the alley." Claire's stomach tightened. "The same people?" "Maybe." He watched for another second. "No. Wait." Headlights flashed once, then twice. Darius exhaled slowly, and some of the tension left his shoulders. "It is Luca." "How can you tell?" "That signal is ours." Claire stepped closer but stayed out of sight of the window. "If he is your ally, why not let him come up?" Darius did not answer right away. He unlocked his phone and typed a message with quick, precise movements. 30 seconds later, another message appeared. "Building may be compromised. I am alone. Do not open for anyone until I confirm." Claire read the words over his shoulder. Compromised? Someone could have followed him here. Or someone in the building could already be reporting our movements. The idea made Claire's apartment feel even smaller. She had lived here for 3 years. Mrs. Alvarez in 4B brought her soup when she was sick. The college student in 3A carried groceries upstairs for the elderly tenants. Now she found herself wondering whether any of them had just described her to a stranger downstairs. Darius set the phone down and looked at her directly. "Claire, I need you to understand something. The safest thing for you would be to walk out that door, go to the police, and tell them exactly where I am. And the safest thing for you? To disappear before they arrive." She searched his face for manipulation, for the cold calculation the news always described. What she saw instead was exhaustion and a kind of resignation that did not fit the image of an untouchable crime boss. "Would the police actually protect me?" she asked softly. Darius held her gaze. "Probably not. The honesty of the answer hit her harder than any reassuring lie could have. A soft buzz came from his phone again. This time the message was only 3 words, "I am coming up." Darius's head snapped toward the door. At that exact moment, the hallway floorboards creaked outside, slow and deliberate, and a shadow passed beneath the narrow strip of light at the bottom of the door. The shadow stopped directly outside Claire's door. The old floorboards creaked once, then went still. Claire could hear her own heartbeat, fast and uneven, while Darius stood a few feet away, every muscle in his body tense despite the fresh bandage beneath his sweatshirt. His phone screen was still glowing with Luca's message, "I am coming up." But the man outside had not identified himself. A soft knock came first, almost polite. Then a familiar voice spoke through the door. "Claire. It is Mrs. Alvarez from 4B. Claire blinked in surprise. The elderly woman had lived across the hall for years. She was the last person Claire expected to hear at this hour. "Mrs. Alvarez?" Claire called carefully. "Are you okay?" "I saw men downstairs asking questions about you," the woman whispered. "They said they were looking for a relative, but something felt wrong. I thought you should know." Claire looked at Darius. His expression remained unreadable, but he gave the slightest nod, permission to respond. Claire kept the chain locked and opened the door only an inch. Mrs. Alvarez stood in the hallway in a pink robe and slippers, silver hair wrapped in a scarf. She looked genuinely frightened. "2 men are by the front entrance," she said. "And another one is sitting in a black truck across the alley. I did not tell them anything, but they have been watching the building." "Thank you," Claire whispered. Mrs. Alvarez's eyes flicked toward the apartment behind the door, noticing the tall figure standing in the shadows. For a second Claire thought she might panic, but the older woman simply studied Darius with surprising calm. "You are the reason they are here," she said quietly. Darius stepped forward just enough for her to see his face clearly. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Alvarez held his gaze for a long moment. "Then do not let this girl pay the price for helping you." The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Darius lowered his head slightly, a gesture of respect that seemed almost out of place coming from a man with his reputation. "I will not," he said. Mrs. Alvarez nodded once and shuffled back toward her apartment. "The back stairwell is empty for now," she added before closing her door. The hallway fell silent again. Claire locked her door and turned around. Darius was staring at the floor, his jaw tight. "You did not have to involve yourself," he said. "Neither did she. She is 73 and still has better instincts than most of my people." He sank onto the couch, and for the first time since she met him, he looked genuinely tired. The adrenaline that had kept him moving was fading, leaving behind the reality of blood loss, exhaustion, and betrayal. Claire sat in the armchair across from him, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Were you really going to leave before the police came, or were you planning to disappear and never think about this apartment again?" Darius looked up at her. The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I do not forget people who help me. That is not what I asked." A faint smile appeared, tired but real. "You are a lot braver now than you were in the alley." "I was not brave in the alley. I was terrified. And you helped me anyway." Claire looked down at her hands. "When my father was hit by a car, people drove past him for almost 10 minutes before anyone stopped. I was 16. I remember sitting in the hospital thinking that the worst part was not the accident. It was knowing that dozens of people saw him and decided he was not their problem." The room grew very still. Darius listened without interrupting. "So when I saw you tonight," she continued softly, "I did not see a mafia boss. I saw someone alone in the rain asking for help." Darius leaned back against the couch and closed his eyes. For a moment. When he opened them again, the guarded expression had changed. The dangerous edge was still there, but beneath it was something far more human. Claire, he said quietly, do you know what people usually do when they learn who I am? What? They either ask for money, ask for protection, or look for the nearest exit. His dark eyes held hers across the small apartment. You are the first person who has looked at me and talked about my pain instead of my power. The apartment felt different after Darius said it. The first person who talked about my pain instead of my power. The words lingered in the air between them while rain traced slow lines down the window and the city hummed faintly beyond the alley. Claire had spent years learning how to comfort strangers in hospital rooms, but she had never imagined sitting across from a man whose name could make hardened detectives lower their voices. And yet, in that moment, he did not look feared. He looked tired. Darius rested his forearms on his knees, careful of the bandage beneath the sweatshirt. The movement exposed part of the tattoo on his wrist, black ink disappearing under the cuff. You should try to sleep for a few hours, Claire said softly. Your body needs rest. He gave a quiet huff of amusement. I have not slept more than 2 consecutive hours in almost a year. That is not something to brag about. I was not bragging. Claire stood and walked to the kitchenette, more for something to do than because she was hungry. She filled the kettle and switched it on. The ordinary sound of boiling water felt strangely comforting after everything that had happened. Tea? She asked. If you are having some. She prepared 2 mugs, adding honey to his without asking. When she handed it to him, Darius looked genuinely surprised. How did you know I take honey? I did not. Most people do when they are injured and exhausted. He wrapped both hands around the mug, absorbing the warmth. For a few seconds he simply stared at the steam rising between them. Then he spoke. My mother used to make tea exactly like this. Claire settled back into the armchair. Used to. She died when I was 20. His voice remained even, but she could hear the weight behind it. Cancer. By the time we caught it, there was not much the doctors could do. I am sorry. He nodded once. She was a schoolteacher in Harlem. The kind of woman who believed every problem could be solved by education and patience. A faint smile touched his mouth. She would be horrified by what I became. Claire studied him over the rim of her mug. What did you become? The question hung there, dangerous and honest. Darius looked toward the dark window before answering. A man who learned that fear is sometimes the only language dangerous people understand. And do you believe that? I believe it kept me alive long enough to build something that could protect the people I care about. Claire thought about the news stories, the whispered rumors, the black SUV waiting somewhere outside. But it also made you enemies. More than I can count. He took a slow sip of tea. When my mother died, I inherited responsibilities I was not ready for. Debts, people depending on me, men who saw a 20-year-old kid and assumed he would be easy to manipulate. I spent the next decade proving them wrong. By becoming harder than they were. Darius met her eyes. Yes. The honesty of the answer should have frightened her, but instead it made him seem more real. Not a myth, not a headline, but a man who had made choices under pressure and carried the consequences ever since. Claire looked down at the photo on the side table, the one from Coney Island. Her father was laughing in it, his arm around her shoulders, both of them holding melting ice cream cones. My dad was a bus driver, she said quietly. He worked overtime almost every week because he was trying to save enough money to help me go to nursing school someday. Darius listened the same way she had listened to him, without interrupting. After he died, my mother fell apart for a while. I took extra shifts, delayed school, did whatever I could to keep us afloat. That is why I cannot stand the idea of walking past someone who needs help. I know what it feels like to wish one person had stopped. Darius looked down at the mug in his hands, then back at her. Something in his expression softened, the hard edges easing for just a moment. Claire, he said quietly, you saved my life tonight. But I think you also reminded me of the man my mother wanted me to be before the world convinced me I had to become someone else. By 3:30 in the morning, the storm had begun to ease, but the tension inside Claire's apartment had only deepened. The tea mug sat empty on the coffee table, and the small studio was lit by a single lamp near the couch. Darius had finally leaned back against the cushions, though Claire could tell he was not truly resting. His eyes kept drifting toward the window, toward the alley where the black SUV waited somewhere beyond the rain. Then his phone vibrated again. Darius picked it up immediately. His expression hardened as he read the message. Claire watched the change happen in real time, the brief softness from their conversation disappearing behind the controlled mask that had made him so feared. "What is it?" she asked. He did not answer at first. He typed a response, waited, then looked up. "Luca confirmed the leak is real," he said quietly. "One of my captains has been feeding information to the people who arranged tonight's attack. Do they know you are here?" "Not yet." He paused. "But they know I survived, and they are searching every place I might have gone." Claire wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Then you need to leave before sunrise." Darius studied her face, as if trying to decide whether she was saying it for her own safety or his. "That is the smart answer," he said. "You do not sound convinced." He looked down at the phone in his hand. "Because leaving also means they keep hunting the person who helped me." Claire's stomach tightened. "Me?" "Yes." The word was blunt, undeniable. Darius sat forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Claire, listen to me carefully. By dawn, my people will have a secure location ready. Once I get there, I can make sure no one touches you." "How?" "You would have security." Claire almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "I am a nursing student who drives a 12-year-old Honda and lives in a 400-square-foot apartment. I do not need bodyguards. You might now." The seriousness in his voice erased any humor. Claire looked away, trying to process how quickly her life had changed. 12 hours earlier she had been worrying about tuition payments and an upcoming pharmacology exam. Now one of the most powerful men in New York was discussing security details in her living room. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Because I owe you my life." "That cannot be the only reason." Darius was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. "Do you know how many people have helped me without expecting something in return?" Claire shook her head. "None." The answer settled heavily between them. Darius looked toward the framed photo of her father again. "You saw a stranger in trouble and acted. You did not ask who I was, what I could give you, or whether helping me was safe. People like that are rare, Claire." She held his gaze, and for the first time since the news broadcast, she saw something that did not fit the legend at all. Gratitude. Real gratitude, unguarded and almost unfamiliar to him. His phone buzzed once more. Darius read the message and stood carefully. "Luca is in position behind the building," he said. "The alley is clear for the next few minutes." Claire rose with him. The sudden realization that he was about to leave hit harder than she expected. The apartment had felt impossibly dangerous with him in it, yet the idea of the door closing behind him made the room seem strangely empty. Darius walked to the window and looked out through the curtain. The rain had slowed to a mist, and the first hint of gray was beginning to touch the sky above the rooftops. "I need to go before the streets get busy," he said. He turned back to her, and the distance between them suddenly felt much smaller than the few feet of worn carpet. "Claire, after tonight you may notice things around you. A car that seems to appear twice. Someone lingering near your building. If that happens, you do not ignore it." "Darius, I am serious." His dark eyes locked onto hers. "Until I know exactly who betrayed me, I cannot assume you are safe. And I will not let the woman who saved my life become collateral damage in a war she never chose." The sky over Queens was turning the color of cold steel when Darius moved toward the door. The storm had passed, leaving the alley below slick with rain and reflecting the pale glow of the streetlights. Claire stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself, watching the man who had entered her life as a wounded stranger prepare to disappear back into the shadows of a world she still did not fully understand. Darius paused beside the coffee table and reached into the pocket of the jacket that had finally dried enough to wear. He pulled out a small black object and set it carefully on the wood between them. It was a phone, slimmer than any model Claire had seen, with no visible logo and only one contact listed on the screen. "What is this?" she asked. "A direct line to me," he said. "It cannot be traced through normal channels." Claire looked up. "You are giving me your personal number?" A faint smile touched his mouth. "Very few people have it." "Darius, I cannot accept something like this." "You can, and you should." His tone was gentle but left little room for argument. "If anything feels wrong, if someone approaches you, follows you, or asks questions about tonight, you call that phone. Day or night." Claire picked it up reluctantly. The device felt surprisingly heavy in her hand, as if it carried the weight of everything that had happened since she stepped into the rain outside the subway station. "I still do not understand why you trust me," she admitted. Darius looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because you had every reason to walk away, and you did not. People reveal who they are when helping someone becomes inconvenient." The word settled deep in her chest. Claire thought about the fear she had felt in the alley, the panic when the news showed his face, the knock on the door, and the black SUV waiting outside. Any one of those moments could have sent her running. Yet somehow she was standing here, holding a secure phone given to a Mafia boss, and what frightened her most was not him leaving. It was the possibility that she might never see him again. Darius opened the door a few inches and listened to the hallway. Satisfied, he looked back at her. The hard, commanding presence had returned, but it no longer seemed as impenetrable as it had hours earlier. Claire had seen the man beneath it, the son of a Harlem schoolteacher, the exhausted leader betrayed by someone he trusted, the patient who had admitted he had not slept properly in a year. "Luca is waiting by the back stairwell," he said. "Once I leave, lock the door and do not open it for anyone until after sunrise." Claire nodded, though the apartment already felt emptier with the door cracked open. Darius stepped into the hallway, then stopped and turned back. For a heartbeat neither of them spoke. The silence carried everything they had shared that night, fear, honesty, grief, and the strange connection formed when two lonely people chose to trust each other. "Claire," he said quietly, "my mother used to tell me that the world is changed by people who stop when everyone else keeps walking." His dark eyes held hers. "Tonight, you changed mine." Before she could find an answer, he pulled the door closed behind him. Claire locked it immediately and rested her forehead against the wood, listening to his footsteps fade down the stairwell. A few seconds later she heard a car door open in the alley below, then the low rumble of an engine pulling away. She crossed to the window and parted the curtain just enough to see the black SUV disappear into the waking city. The first rays of dawn were breaking between the buildings, turning the wet streets gold. Claire stood there for a long time, the phone still in her hand, her textbooks forgotten on the kitchen counter, her old life feeling impossibly far away. Somewhere beyond those rooftops, the most feared man in New York was fighting a betrayal that could destroy his empire. And for reasons she still could not explain, he had left a piece of that dangerous world in the hands of the woman who had found him alone in the rain. As the city began to wake around her, Claire looked down at the single contact glowing on the screen and understood one terrifying truth: saving a stranger had been the easy part. The real story was only beginning.